Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about the European Union. The European Union is a group of countries who have come together and they formed this organization called the European Union, and to shorten it we say the EU. And they work together to keep peace between countries and help strengthen Europe's economy. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So when did the EU start? The EU was created after World War II. World War II was a major event. Europe was a mess after it was over. And all of these countries looked around and said, we don't really want this to happen again. It had just happened in World War I, then again in World War II, and they said, what can we do to make sure that this does not happen again? So they decided to form a group, form an alliance almost, where they would work together to keep peace. The first version was called the European Economic Community, and it was created in 1957, so a few years after the end of World War II. And over time, they changed the name to the European Union in 1992. It became known as the European Union, the EU. So what does the EU do? Okay, it has some different jobs that it does. Its main purpose is that it unites or binds people and governments together. You are less likely to go to war with somebody or to have tension with another country if you are working together for some kind of common goal. So the EU really tries to bind people and governments together. It has strength that no one nation can have alone, which is important. So if one country does decide to cause trouble or start tensions, this group, the European Union, they work together to work out those issues before major war happens. And they create common economic, social, and government policies and foreign policies. So foreign meaning relations with countries outside of the EU. So they work together to create those kinds of policies so that some things each country deals with separately, but some things they work together on. Some things that the EU doesn't do, it doesn't change language, culture, or heritage. So even though countries like Germany and France and the UK and Poland have all decided to come together in the EU, it doesn't mean that they have abandoned their languages or their culture or their heritage, meaning they keep those things, those important pieces of their culture, the same as they always were. The EU also doesn't make decisions about healthcare, education, or defense. So each country is still responsible for defending themselves, raising an army if they want to, and making decisions about how healthcare and education are provided to their citizens. Now, the euro is something that you may hear a lot about. When these countries came together, they did decide to work towards a strong economy for all of Europe. And one thing that they decided to do over time was to move towards having a common currency. Currency is the type of money that's used in a place. So the countries in the EU, in the European Union, decided that they were going to use a common currency called the euro. So the euro, there's some pictures of it. We've seen some examples in class. This is the dollar sign. This is the sign for the euro. And countries started using the euro in 2002. Now, different exchange rates change every day depending on how much the value is, goes up and down, but right now it's about 0.72 euro cents for $1 US. Some countries in the European Union use the euro, some do not. Some choose to retain their own currency. For example, the UK is an important member of the EU, but they keep the British pound. They don't use the euro because they wanted to keep that as part of their culture. Other countries in the EU don't use the euro because their economy isn't strong enough on its own yet to support the euro. So you kind of have to look and see which countries in the EU use it and which ones do not. So what changed before and after the European Union? So kind of going to break it down here. Before the European Union, all countries have different currencies. After the EU, most of them moved to the euro, so that's one we already talked about. Another major change was that countries in the EU decided to make it easier to travel between European Union countries. So before, you would have to use a passport. You would have to show a passport, which is documentation of what country you are from, and you would have to go through a long line every time you wanted to move between countries and get a stamp and show proof that you were moving in and out legally. The European Union countries have decided to get rid of that, to make travel easier. So before the EU, you needed passports for travel. Now you don't. You don't need to show any documentation to move between EU countries. If you're going to move to a country that's not in the EU, then you still do need a passport. Before the EU, trade rules were different in each country. Each country decided what kind of taxes they were going to do for items traded between countries. They made decisions about what they were going to sell and what prices they were going to charge for things. After the EU, they moved to what's called a single market type of economy, where all goods and services move freely with no barriers. So between EU countries, you can buy and sell whatever you like with very little interference. It's a single market. You don't have to worry about changing your currency or worrying about different tax laws because all EU countries use the same tax laws. And this talks about tax laws. And everybody contributes to a central budget now. So that's just a little bit of information about the EU. We're going to be doing the EU experience where we're going to see what it was like living in European countries before the EU and after. So I want you to keep just some of these basic pieces of information about the EU in your mind as we experience that and think, is life better now or not? Better in the EU or better before the EU? So keep that in mind. Have a great day.